Science is great, and the material world is wonderful, and what we can know of it and control it is great. But is that all there is to reality? I mean, even something as mysterious as a friendship or falling in love, can that be reduced to, glands or to chemicals or something? Even things that we experience in ordinary life don't seem understandable simply in a scientific way. There are elusive realities. Looking around this place, this beautiful place, what inspired these people to do it? Oh, it's chemical reactions in the brain. Doesn't that just seem inadequate as an explanation? I find that fascinating. You don't for a second denigrate the visible world or deny what science knows about it. But there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy or your chemistry or your physics or your science. So I wouldn't pose an either or, like there's science and there's magic, or there's science and superstition. There's science and then there's, wow, this super science. Thomas Aquinas called theology the sacra scientia. It's the holy science. It's a way of knowing. I think we have to recover that. I would submit that the doctrines concerning the so-called last things, hell, purgatory, and heaven, are simultaneously the most fascinating and the most objectionable of all of the Catholic Church's beliefs. When people want to critique or dismiss Catholic doctrine, they will often point to the supposed incompatibility of affirming the existence of an all-good God and an eternal hell, a place of unending torture. And at least from the time of Marx and Freud, many would point to the doctrine concerning heaven as an indication of, at best, the Church's naivete, and at worst, its duplicity. Is the belief in a place of perfect happiness after we die not a classic case of wishful thinking, childish fantasizing? And hasn't it been used as opium for the masses, simply a way to mollify people enduring the agonies of life? And even many Christians who gladly accept the doctrines of heaven and hell find the teaching on purgatory bizarre and arbitrary, lacking in any biblical foundation. Everyone, believer and non-believer alike, wonders and worries at some point about what will happen after we die. Hamlet spoke of that bourne from which no man returns, and the entire to be or not to be speech reflects an uneasy, bewildered fascination with what awaits us once we've shuffled off this mortal coil. Everyone loves a ghost story, in part because of its cathartic quality, but also because it seems to provide some hint of another world. More to it, the doctrines of heaven, hell, and purgatory beguile us precisely because of our sense of justice. Far too many good people die without receiving in this life a sufficient reward for their goodness. And many wicked people die without being compelled in this life to pay for their wickedness. If God is just, it seems there has to be some state of being, some place, in which these injustices are set right. And so we turn to the last things. What does the Catholic Church teach in regard to heaven, hell, and purgatory? What does it hold concerning a dimension that we cannot directly see, but that nevertheless intrigues all of us who live on the near side of the sleep of death? T.S. Eliot said that Western literature is divided between two truly great figures, Shakespeare and Dante, all the rest qualifying as secondary. If Eliot's right, how wonderful that the principal work of one of the two greatest writers in the West has to do with our subject, with heaven, hell, and purgatory. Dante composed his masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, when he was wandering in exile, far from his beloved Florence, a city to which he would never return. It was during those lonely years, when he was lost both personally and politically, that Dante composed this work on the world to come. The Divine Comedy is obviously a work of creative imagination, so we shouldn't take it with complete literalness. Nevertheless, it's informed by very sound theology and marked at every turn by the perceptiveness of a transcendently great poet who's also a profound believer. Therefore, as we seek to look through the veil into the world to come, we can take Dante as a very reliable guide. Dante's first stop, and ours, will be hell. Dante is led through hell by the Roman poet Virgil. They move downward through the topography of hell, winding their way on an ever narrower path, until they come to the very bottom, where they see Satan himself. The devil, first of all, is not standing amidst fire, but rather stuck in ice, frozen in place. St. Augustine defines sin as being incurvatus in se, caved in on oneself. We are meant to break out of the narrow confines of the self and to mix with the world. We are by nature hungry for the fullness of being. To sin is voluntarily to turn away from this and to reign as the sovereign of one's own little kingdom. In Dante's imagination, Satan has great wings like a bat. We are meant to fly. Chesterton asked, "How come the angels can fly?" His answer, "Because they take themselves so lightly." Sin is a heaviness, the state of being weighed down. We try to fly, flapping our wings, because that's our nature. But all we succeed in doing is making the world around us colder. Satan, for Dante, is responsible for the frozen meteorology of hell. Satan has three faces, mimicking the three persons of the Trinity, because he dared to grasp at godliness. All of us sinners, deep down, think that we're God, because we're convinced that the universe revolves around us. Dante tells us that From all 6 of his eyes, Satan weeps. Sin, self-absorption, being stuck in the narrow confines of the ego, is above all sad. There's nothing glamorous about evil. It is depressing, soul-shrinking, and finally powerless. When Virgil and Dante approach Satan, he does nothing to stop them. Like someone caught in a deep depression, he doesn't even notice them. This is the total self-absorption of hell. Hell, like heaven, can be anticipated even now. Whenever we choose the iciness of self-absorption, we are tasting hell. Why is Satan where he is? The short answer, because he wants to be there. The doctrine of hell really is a corollary of 2 more fundamental convictions, namely that God is love and that we are free. As I've said before, love is not simply an attribute of God, not simply something God does from time to time. Rather, love is what God is. God's love, therefore, is like the sun that shines on the good and bad alike. What makes all the difference is how that love is received. If we freely receive it positively, we bask in its light and its warmth. But if it's resisted, it becomes like a torture to us. C.S. Lewis said, "It's precisely the love of God that lights up the fires of hell." What could that possibly mean? Well, think of someone who's been stuck in a deep mine for several days, and now they're suddenly brought out into the bright glare of the sunlight. Well, it'd be like agony to them. Or think of someone in a terrible frame of mind. Who is most annoying to them? Precisely someone who's relentlessly cheerful. God's love is eternal. God's love is absolute. What makes the difference is how we freely respond to it. We can say yes or we can say no. And that's the terrible truth in some way about human freedom. God gave us the ability to say yes to Him or to say no. So finally it's up to us. See, people put the onus on God. You shouldn't put it on God. The onus is on us. Do you accept this life? Do you jump into the party? Do you join it? Or are you like that person who sits sullenly in the corner while the party swirls around him? If anyone's in hell, and again I say if because we don't know, if anyone's there, it's because they stubbornly are sitting in the corner of the party while the whole thing festively swirls around them. Not that God has sent them to the corner. They've sat sullenly in the corner and they won't move. In coming to the topic of heaven, we've come to the end of this series because we've come to the very goal of the Catholic faith. Everything else I've talked about, God, Jesus, the church, liturgy, sacraments, all of it is meant to conduce finally to heaven. God wants to share with us His own Trinitarian life, and that means the life of love. Heaven is love. It's love brought to fulfillment and completion. That's why St. Paul can say there are 3 things that last: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. That's because in heaven, faith and hope will have faded away, but love remains. There are many images in the Bible and the great tradition for heaven. Think of eternal life, eternal rest, the banquet, the wedding feast. All these say something true and right about heaven, but all fall short of that reality which eye has not seen and ear has not heard. There are three images in particular I want to focus on. The beatific vision, the city, and the new heavens and the new earth. Let us consider first the beatific vision, one of the most beautiful symbols of which can be found in the great Cathedral of Notre Dame. St. Thomas Aquinas, who would have known this building when he was professor of theology in Paris, said that the human spirit is structured in such a way that it pushes beyond itself toward the good, the true, and the beautiful. The mind seeks the truth, and it finds it to some degree in this world, but it's never enough because the mind seeks absolute truth. The will seeks the good, and it finds it to some degree within this world, but it's never enough finally to satisfy the will. The soul seeks the beautiful, and to a limited degree it finds it, it achieves it in this world, but it's ordered toward the beautiful itself. There's a kind of holy longing in us. There's an aching, a restlessness that pushes us beyond anything in this world toward a transcendent truth, a transcendent goodness, a transcendent beauty. This is why, as C.S. Lewis so clearly saw, the most exquisite experiences in life, aesthetic pleasure, sexual intimacy, deep friendship, are always accompanied by a certain aching sadness, a sense that there must still be something more. Heaven is what corresponds to that desire beyond desire and to that searching beyond searching. The mind and the will, despite or because of all their achievements here below, still want definitively to see. I first laid eyes on the North Rose window at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on June the 12th, 1989. When I saw the rose window, I stood mesmerized for 20 minutes by its sheer beauty. Then, every single day that I was in Paris until I returned home for Christmas, I went to that spot and stared. The great wheel of the North Rose window, with its myriad parts and harmonious interconnection, and with the sunlight shining through it, certainly qualifies as a beautiful thing. But its beauty is in service of a higher good, for it's meant to be a foretaste of the beauty of the beatific vision. One of the clues of this transcendent purpose is in the window's numeric symbolism. Around the central figures of Christ and his mother are 8 small circles. Then, on the next major row, we find 16 circular images, médaillons in French. And on the next, twice 16, 32 images. And then finally, another row of 32. If we add 32, 32, 16, and 8, we arrive at 88. In a word, the entire window is an artistic meditation on the number 8. Then we recall that 8 is a symbol of eternity, since it stands immediately outside of 7, which evokes the 7 days of the week, or the completed cycle of time. Another clue is found in the very complexity and inexhaustibility of its composition. Why was I drawn for so many days to look at that rose? Partly because there was just so much to take in. The vision of God is like that. St. Bernard reminded us that the beatific vision is not something we take in all at once. Rather, the more we see, the more we want to see. The more we know of God, the more we want to know. The more we explore, the hungrier we are to explore even more. Thomas Aquinas said that the saints in heaven realize to their delight just how incomprehensible God is. I realize that all this talk about knowing and seeing can give the impression that the life of heaven is a passive and lonely business, a bit like taking a solitary stroll through an art gallery. We wonder, wouldn't even the most compelling and beautiful vision in time become tiresome? That's why we have to supplement this idea of the beatific vision with that of the city, of the heavenly Jerusalem. There's nothing passive or individualist about a city bustling with energy, life, and creativity. Cities are places where communal activities and entertainments of all varieties are on offer. Life in the heavenly Jerusalem is something like that. In union with the angels and the saints, our minds, wills, and energies fully alive and properly focused, we will live in thrilling, interdependent communion with one another. Here below, because of our sins and the natural conflicts of finite existence, communion is so rare, so hard to achieve. But in the city on high, when we've been raised to a new pitch of ontological perfection, and when the self-absorption of sin has been burned away, we will rejoice in one another's accomplishments and delight in the harmony that we can achieve together. A final image I'd like to consider is that of the new heavens and the new earth. Many Christians are more Platonist than biblical in the measure that they see the goal of the spiritual life as getting out of this world and going to heaven. Or to put it more precisely, to facilitate the soul's departure from the body and its subsequent journey to a purely immaterial realm. But this is just not what Christian hope is really about. The Apostles' Creed concludes with the statement, "We believe in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting." And the Nicene Creed closes with, "We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come." Neither declaration of Christian faith speaks of the conviction that the soul will escape from the body and live forever in the disincarnate state. Rather, both speak of resurrection, which involves not the leaving behind of the body, but the transfiguration of the body. The risen Jesus appeared very much in an embodied state to his disciples. He said, "Touch me and see that I have flesh and bones." The God revealed in the Bible made the physical universe and took infinite delight in it. Genesis reminds us that he found it all very good. Presumably, the biblical God, who made the good earth, has no intention of giving up on it, but rather wants to save it and redeem it. And this is precisely what the language of the resurrection of the body is all about. Not an escape from matter, but a renewal of it. what will the resurrected body be like? Drawing inspiration from the gospel descriptions of the risen Christ, Thomas Aquinas speaks of its subtlety, by which he means its time and space transcending capacity, and of its radiance, by which he means its luminous brilliance, and of its agility, by which he means its suppleness and athleticism. He imagines the glorified body as a body fully itself, but exercising its power at a qualitatively higher degree of perfection. John Polkinghorne, a theologian and particle physicist, has offered some fascinating speculations in regard to the resurrected body. He speculates that at death, that form is remembered by God, preserved in the divine mind, and then reconstituted with a new and immortalized materiality. We might imagine the way in which the form of a picture could be preserved in a computer and then downloaded in any number of new instantiations, bigger and more impressive than the original. Because it would be informed by the same pattern, this new body would be in continuity with the old one, but yet be something altogether new, something more splendid and complete. And could this same manner of thinking help us to conceive what a new heavens and a new earth might be? It's been said that the best way to prepare ourselves for life in the world to come is to cultivate our capacity for surprise. We're doing the best we can. I mean, we try to find imagery for heaven. Eye is not seen, ear is not heard what God has prepared for those who love Him, the Bible says. So it's like a different dimensional system. I mean, how do you begin to explain what's at a higher pitch when you're in this system? Think of like a square or a triangle. They're in two dimensions. But now you lift them up into a third dimension, and you make the square into a cube, and the triangle becomes a pyramid. Well, see, in the two-dimensional world, you can't even imagine. What do you mean? What are you talking about, a cube? Or what do you mean, a pyramid? You can't imagine it within this framework. But see, in that example, what's cool about it is you retain the squareness of the square, you retain the triangularity of the triangle, but you've now raised them up to a higher pitch. That's what Paul called the resurrected body is like. So we have these lowly bodies here below. We don't so much get rid of them as they're now brought up to a higher pitch of expressiveness and of life. That's heaven. Catholicism is a way of seeing. Catholicism is a manner of life. Catholicism has a distinctive texture, feel, and resonance. It all begins with, revolves around, and leads to Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh.
love you.